The autumn wind carried dust and desperation through the streets of Boston as Helen Marie Brooks clutched her daughter's small hand, watching their landlord nail an eviction notice to their tenement door. At 27, she had already buried a husband to consumption and lost 3 nursing positions when employers discovered she was a single mother. Annie's bright eyes reflected none of the fear that gnawed at Helen's heart as creditors circled like vultures around their meager possessions. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest like a stone. But she forced her voice to remain steady as she whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. In the dim light of their single room, Helen spread Arthur Williamson's carefully written letters across her worn quilt, each one a lifeline thrown across the vast distance between Boston and Colorado territory. His correspondence spoke of honor, of a quiet ranch where a woman and child could find safety, of a man who understood hardship and asked only for companionship in return. The photograph showed a stern but kind face above a military uniform, and his words carried the weight of genuine loneliness that matched her own. Annie traced the letters with her finger, practicing the name of the man who might become her stepfather, while Helen wondered if courage alone could bridge the gap between desperate hope and unknown reality. The train's whistle echoed across the Colorado plains as Helen adjusted Annie's traveling dress and tried to calm the butterflies dancing in her stomach. 3 weeks of correspondence had led to this momentous marriage proposal from a wounded veteran who promised shelter in exchange for care and companionship. Through the grimy window, she watched the landscape transform from bustling cities to endless sky, each mile carrying them further from everything familiar and closer to a future built on faith and necessity. Annie pressed her nose to the glass, chattering excitedly about horses and wide-open spaces, her innocent enthusiasm a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety tightening in Helen's throat. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. The train shuddered to a halt at Millbrook Station, and Helen's heart nearly stopped when she saw Sergeant Tim Murphy waiting alone on the platform, his weathered face grave with unspoken news. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, removing his hat with military precision, "I'm afraid Captain Williamson couldn't make the journey himself. He's not the same man who wrote those letters." The words hit her like a physical blow as Tim explained the accident to fall from his horse 3 months ago that had left Arthur confined to a wheelchair and consumed by a darkness that no amount of medical attention could penetrate. Helen's carefully constructed hopes crumbled around her as she realized the gentle, hopeful man from the letters had been replaced by someone entirely different. Standing on the dusty platform with her daughter's hand in hers and their belongings at their feet, Helen felt the full weight of her predicament settle around her like a suffocating blanket. She had spent their last dollars on train tickets, had burned every bridge in Boston, and now faced a choice between the unknown challenges ahead and the certain destruction behind. Tim watched her with sympathetic eyes, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking, while Annie tugged at her mother's skirt, unaware that their entire future hung in the balance of this moment. The wind whistled through the station, carrying the scent of sage and possibility, as Helen realized that sometimes the only way forward is through the very thing that terrifies you most. "I've come this far," Helen said quietly, lifting her chin with a determination that surprised even herself. "And Annie needs a home more than I need certainty." Tim's relief was palpable as he loaded their trunks onto his wagon, explaining during the bumpy ride to the ranch that Arthur had retreated into himself since the accident, refusing visitors and barely speaking to anyone. The sprawling ranch house came into view as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, its wraparound porch and flower boxes speaking of better times when hope still lived within its walls. Helen squeezed Annie's hand and whispered a prayer for strength, knowing that whatever waited inside would require every ounce of courage she possessed. The ranch house's interior reflected its owner's despair-heavy curtains, blocked most of the natural light, and dust motes danced in the few rays that managed to penetrate the gloom. Mrs. Eloise Williamson emerged from the shadows like a disapproving specter, her silver hair pulled back severely and her pale eyes evaluating Helen with barely concealed hostility. "So you're the woman who thinks she can save my son," she said coldly, her voice carrying decades of disappointment and protective fury. Helen straightened her shoulders and met the older woman's gaze directly, understanding that this first impression would set the tone for everything that followed. while Annie hid behind her mother's skirts, sensing the tension that crackled through the air like electricity before a storm. The moment Helen chose to stay despite every instinct screaming at her to flee came when she heard the sound of breaking glass from the back room, followed by Tim's patient voice trying to calm someone in obvious distress. Without hesitation, she handed Annie to Mrs. Williamson and walked toward the sound, her nursing instincts overriding her fear and uncertainty. The sight that greeted her would haunt her dreams. Captain Arthur Williamson, the proud soldier from the photographs, slumped in his wheelchair surrounded by the shattered remains of a water pitcher, his face twisted with rage and self-loathing. In that moment, looking into his dark eyes filled with pain that went far deeper than physical injury, Helen made the choice that would change both their lives forever. She would not abandon him to his darkness. "I'm Helen," she said simply, kneeling beside his wheelchair without flinching at the glass scattered around them, her voice carrying the same calm authority she had used with difficult patients in Boston. Arthur's initial response was to turn away, muttering something about not needing another nursemaid, but something in her steady presence seemed to cut through his defenses. She began cleaning up the broken glass with efficient movements, neither pitying nor judging, simply accepting the situation for what it was and moving forward with practical solutions. Tim watched from the doorway with something approaching hope, recognizing in Helen the same quiet strength that had once made Arthur a natural leader of men. That evening, as Helen tucked Annie into bed in the small room that would serve as their temporary home, she listened to her daughter's excited whispers about the sad soldier man in the big house with so many rooms to explore. Through the thin walls, she could hear Arthur's voice raised in argument with his mother, the words indistinct, but the pain unmistakable, followed by the sound of his wheelchair rolling across the wooden floors with increasing agitation. The weight of what she had undertaken pressed down upon her shoulders like a physical burden. But something deeper than mere obligation had taken root in her heart during that first encounter, recognition of shared pain, and the possibility of mutual healing. The next morning brought Helen's first real glimpse of the man Arthur had been, when she found him on the back porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. For a moment, his face held an expression of wonder that reminded her of the thoughtful correspondent who had written about finding beauty in small moments, before the familiar mask of bitterness slipped back into place. "You should go back to Boston," he said without looking at her, his voice flat and emotionless. "This isn't what you signed up for, and I won't pretend to be something I'm not anymore." Helen settled into the chair beside him, her hands folded calmly in her lap, and waited for him to realize that she had no intention of leaving. The transformation of the ranch house began with small changes. Helen opened curtains to let in natural light, moved furniture to create better pathways for Arthur's wheelchair, and established routines that brought structure to chaos. Mrs. Williamson watched these alterations with growing alarm, interpreting each improvement as a threat to her position as primary caretaker, while Arthur remained largely indifferent to the changes swirling around him. But Annie's delighted laughter, as she explored her new home, seemed to penetrate even Arthur's emotional armor, and Helen caught him watching the child with an expression that hinted at the man he might still become. The special world they were entering together would require all of them to abandon old assumptions and embrace new possibilities. Helen's nursing background proved invaluable as she observed Arthur's daily routines, noting not just his physical limitations but the subtle signs of depression that manifested in poor appetite, disrupted sleep, and withdrawal from activities he once enjoyed. She began incorporating small therapeutic exercises into his day, disguised as practical tasks, asking him to help her reach high shelves, consulting him about household repairs, gradually rebuilding his sense of usefulness without making her intentions obvious. Tim became her ally in these efforts, sharing stories of Arthur's military service and the natural leadership qualities that had earned him the loyalty of his men. The bonds forming between them were tentative but real, built on mutual respect, rather than pity or obligation. Annie's presence in the house brought an unexpected element of healing that none of the adults had anticipated. The 5-year-old showed no fear of Arthur's wheelchair or his sometimes gruff demeanor, treating him with the same casual acceptance she offered everyone in her small world. She would climb onto his lap to share picture books, chatter about her dolls during his physical therapy sessions, and include him in her elaborate games of make-believe without any sense that he might be different or limited. Arthur's defenses began to crack under the assault of pure, uncomplicated affection. and Helen often caught him smiling at Annie's antics before remembering to scowl again. The first breakthrough came during a thunderstorm that sent Annie running to Arthur for comfort, her small body trembling with fear as lightning illuminated the ranch house in stark, dramatic flashes. Without thinking, Arthur gathered her close, murmuring reassurances in the same steady voice he had once used to calm frightened soldiers under enemy fire. Helen watched from the doorway as 20 minutes of gentle comfort transformed both and receiver, seeing in Arthur's protective instincts the first real sign of the man he could still become. The storm passed, but something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between them all, creating space for deeper connections to grow. Helen's innovative approach to Arthur's physical therapy drew from techniques she had learned working with injured factory workers in Boston, adapted to address both his physical limitations and his emotional resistance to traditional medical treatment. She introduced exercises disguised as woodworking projects, used Annie's games to encourage movement and coordination, and gradually increased his activity level without making it feel like medical intervention. Mrs. Williamson disapproved of these unconventional methods, preferring the formal distance of professional care. But even she couldn't deny the subtle improvements in Arthur's posture, appetite, and general engagement with life around him. The growing partnership between Helen and Arthur manifested in small but significant ways. Shared glances across the dinner table when Annie made a particularly amusing observation, quiet conversations about household management that gradually expanded to include his opinions on ranch operations, moments of comfortable silence that spoke of increasing trust and understanding. Arthur began asking about Helen's life in Boston, her late husband, and the challenges of raising a child alone, showing the first genuine interest in another person he had displayed since his accident. These conversations often stretched late into the evening, both of them hungry for adult companionship and intellectual stimulation after months of isolation. The moment of true emotional commitment came when Arthur opened up about his war experiences and the guilt he carried over surviving when so many of his men had not. Helen listened without judgment, sharing her own fears about failing as a mother and provider, creating a sacred space where both could acknowledge their deepest vulnerabilities. The wheelchair became less a symbol of limitation and more simply a part of who Arthur was, as Helen demonstrated through her actions that she valued his mind, his character, and his potential rather than focusing on his physical restrictions. That night, sitting together on the porch under a canopy of stars, they both understood that what was growing between them transcended the practical arrangement that had brought them together. Mrs. Williamson's opposition to Helen's presence intensified as she witnessed the positive changes in her son, interpreting his improvement as a betrayal of his need for her constant care and protection. She began undermining Helen's efforts with passive-aggressive comments about inappropriate treatments and false hopes, while questioning her qualifications and motivations in front of Arthur and Tim. The tension in the household became palpable, as Mrs. Williamson's fear of losing her son battled against Arthur's growing independence and confidence. Helen found herself walking a careful line between supporting Arthur's progress and respecting his mother's genuine but misguided love. Arthur's emerging strength was tested when a letter arrived from his former commanding officer, offering him a position training new recruits at a military academy, a job that would accommodate his physical limitations while utilizing his tactical knowledge and leadership skills. The opportunity represented everything Helen had been working toward, but it also meant leaving the ranch and the life they had been building together. Arthur's initial excitement gave way to doubt and fear as old insecurities resurfaced, questioning whether he could handle the responsibility and whether Helen would want to uproot Annie for such an uncertain future. The letter lay open on the kitchen table for days, a symbol of possibilities that both thrilled and terrified them. A series of small discoveries about each other deepened Helen and Arthur's connection during this period of uncertainty. Helen learned that Arthur had been writing poetry since his injury, pouring his pain and gradual healing into verses that revealed a sensitive, artistic soul beneath the military exterior. Arthur discovered Helen's talent for mechanical repairs, watching in amazement as she fixed a broken clock with the same patient precision she applied to his therapy sessions. These revelations challenged their assumptions about each other and about themselves, creating a foundation of respect and admiration that went far beyond their original practical arrangement. Annie's innocent questions about why Arthur couldn't walk like other people led to honest conversations about difference, acceptance, and the various ways people could be valuable and whole. Helen marveled at her daughter's matter-of-fact acceptance of Arthur's condition and her creative solutions to the small challenges it presented, bringing him books he couldn't reach, helping him navigate uneven ground, including his wheelchair in her elaborate obstacle courses. These interactions taught all the adults lessons about resilience and adaptation, while Annie's unconditional love provided a healing balm for wounds that medical treatment couldn't touch. The ranch itself began to reflect the positive changes occurring within its walls as Arthur took renewed interest in its management and improvement. He worked with Tim to plan necessary repairs and upgrades, consulted with Helen about modernizing the kitchen and living spaces, and even began sketching designs for accessibility modifications that would make the property more comfortable for his needs. This shift from passive patient to active participant in shaping his environment marked a crucial step in his psychological recovery, while the physical improvements to the ranch provided concrete evidence of their growing partnership and shared vision for the future. Helen's past as a nurse's aide proved invaluable when Arthur developed complications from an old war injury, requiring both medical knowledge and emotional support to navigate the crisis. Her calm competence during the emergency earned Mrs. Williamson's grudging respect and demonstrated to Arthur that Helen's commitment to their partnership extended beyond fair weather circumstances. The experience of working together to address serious medical challenges revealed depths of trust and interdependence that formal marriage ceremonies could never establish, binding them together with bonds forged in adversity and mutual care. The first serious threat to their growing happiness arrived in the form of Helen's former brother-in-law from Boston, who appeared at the ranch demanding that she return Annie to her proper family and claiming that her marriage to Arthur was nothing more than an elaborate scheme to avoid her responsibilities. His accusations struck at Helen's deepest insecurities about her worthiness as a mother and a woman, while his threats to involve legal authorities created genuine fear about losing custody of Annie. Arthur's fierce, protective response surprised everyone, including himself, as he rose to Helen's defense with a strength and authority that recalled his military leadership, proving that his disabilities had not diminished his capacity to fight for those he loved. The confrontation with Helen's brother revealed crucial information that changed everything: letters from Helen's late husband expressing his wishes that Annie be raised by Helen alone, legal documents that proved her complete custody rights, and evidence of the brother-in-law's financial difficulties that explained his sudden interest in gaining control of Annie's small inheritance. Arthur's strategic mind, honed by years of military planning, quickly assembled these facts into a case that exposed the man's true motivations while protecting Helen and Annie from his threats. This crisis brought all the hidden strengths in their relationship to the surface, proving that their partnership could withstand external challenges as well as internal doubts. Mrs. Williamson's perspective began to shift as she witnessed Arthur's transformation during the crisis, seeing glimpses of the strong, capable man he had been and was becoming again. Her resistance to Helen softened as she recognized that her son's improvements were not a rejection of his need for family but evidence of his growing capacity to love and be loved in new ways. The older woman's protective instincts gradually expanded to include Helen and Annie, creating the possibility of a true family unit built on mutual care rather than dependency and obligation. The arrival of Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a pioneering female physician specializing in rehabilitation medicine, provided both medical validation of Helen's therapeutic approaches and a powerful ally in Arthur's continued recovery. Dr. Morrison's assessment confirmed that Arthur's condition could continue to improve with proper care and exercise, while her modern perspectives on disability and adaptation opened new possibilities for his future. Her presence also challenged prevailing attitudes about women's roles and capabilities, inspiring both Helen and Mrs. Williamson to consider broader definitions of feminine strength and achievement. Arthur's decision to accept the teaching position at the military academy marked a crucial moment in his journey from victim to victor, representing his willingness to embrace challenge and uncertainty in service of growth and purpose. The decision was made not from desperation but from strength, with Helen's full support and partnership in planning their new life together. Annie's excitement about the adventure ahead contrasted beautifully with the adults' more measured but equally genuine enthusiasm, creating a family dynamic based on shared dreams rather than shared necessity. The revelation that Helen was pregnant came as a shock to everyone, including Helen herself, adding new complexity to their already transformed lives while providing ultimate proof of the deep connection that had developed between her and Arthur. This unexpected development forced them to confront questions about their readiness for expanded family responsibilities and their commitment to each other beyond their original arrangement. Arthur's joy at the prospect of becoming a father, tempered by realistic concerns about his ability to provide proper care and support, revealed the depth of his emotional healing and his transformation from a man who had given up on life to one who embraced its possibilities. The major crisis arrived when a late-season blizzard trapped them at the ranch just as Helen went into premature labor, cutting them off from medical help and forcing Arthur to confront his deepest fears about his limitations and usefulness. With only Mrs. Williamson's experience and his own steady hands to rely on, Arthur guided Helen through a difficult but successful delivery, discovering reserves of strength and capability he had never known he possessed. The experience of bringing new life into the world, while completely dependent on each other, created bonds that transcended all previous understanding of what marriage and partnership could mean. The birth of baby Thomas brought healing not only to Helen and Arthur but to the entire family, as Mrs. Williamson embraced her role as grandmother with unexpected joy and tenderness. Annie's delight in her baby brother created new dynamics of responsibility and care that enriched everyone's experience, while the practical demands of caring for an infant provided Arthur with additional motivation for continued physical and emotional strengthening. The baby's arrival transformed the ranch house from a place of convalescence to a true family home filled with purpose and hope. Tim's announcement that he had accepted a position at the same military academy where Arthur would be teaching provided continuity and support for their new adventure, while his obvious affection for Mrs. Williamson suggested new possibilities for companionship and happiness in her later years. The interweaving of their lives created a chosen family structure that honored both blood relations and bonds of affection, proving that love could indeed conquer limitations when expressed through commitment and mutual care. Arthur's final transformation was complete when he stood to address the farewell gathering organized by their neighbors, his legs supporting him for several minutes as he spoke about the power of community, love, and second chances. While he would always need his wheelchair for long distances and difficult terrain, his ability to stand symbolized the psychological and emotional recovery that Helen's love and care had made possible. The applause that followed his speech was not for his physical achievement, but for the inspirational example of resilience and renewal that he and Helen had created together. The final confrontation came not from external enemies, but from Arthur's internal battle with self-doubt, as they prepared to leave the safety of the ranch for the uncertainties of their new life. Standing in the nursery he had helped create for baby Thomas, surrounded by evidence of all they had built together, Arthur was overwhelmed by fear that he might fail Helen and the children when they needed him most. Helen found him there in the pre-dawn darkness, tears streaming down his face as he questioned whether love alone could sustain them through the challenges ahead. Her response was not words, but action, taking his hands and placing them on their sleeping son, reminding him that they had already proven their ability to create miracles together. The neighbors' farewell celebration became an unexpected testament to the impact Helen and Arthur's love story had made on their entire community. Stories emerged of other couples who had found hope in their example, of disabled veterans who had begun to believe in possibilities for their own futures, of women who had discovered new strength in Helen's courage and determination. The evening revealed that their personal healing journey had rippled outward to touch countless other lives, transforming their individual victory into a community triumph that would continue long after their departure. Mrs. Williamson's decision to accompany them to their new home marked the completion of her own transformation from protective adversary to supportive family member. Her confession to Helen that she had been wrong about her motivations and her gratitude for bringing her son back to life created a moment of genuine reconciliation and mutual respect. The older woman's presence would provide stability for the children while Helen and Arthur established themselves in their new roles, creating a multi-generational support system built on love rather than obligation. The physical challenges of the journey to the academy provided one final test of Arthur's recovery and their partnership's strength. When their wagon broke down in rough terrain, Arthur's mechanical knowledge and leadership skills proved essential to solving the problem, while Helen's medical training was needed to treat a fellow traveler's injury. Working together under pressure, they demonstrated that their individual strengths complemented each other perfectly, creating a team that was stronger than either could be alone. Arthur's first day at the military academy brought the ultimate test of his healing journey as he stood before a classroom of young cadets, some of whom looked skeptically at their wheelchair-bound instructor. His opening lecture about the nature of true strength and the various forms courage could take transformed initial doubt into rapt attention, as his words carried the authority of lived experience rather than theoretical knowledge. The standing ovation that followed marked not just professional success, but personal vindication, proof that his disabilities had not diminished his ability to inspire and lead others. The establishment of their new household near the academy created opportunities for both Helen and Arthur to pursue expanded roles and ambitions. Helen's work with the academy's medical staff and her innovative approaches to rehabilitation gained recognition throughout the region, while Arthur's teaching methods and inspirational example attracted attention from military leaders across the country. Their marriage had evolved from desperate necessity to passionate partnership, with each supporting the other's dreams and aspirations while building a life together that neither could have imagined alone. Annie's adjustment to their new home and her role as big sister provided daily reminders of the healing power of love and acceptance. Her matter-of-fact explanations to new friends about her stepfather's wheelchair and her baby brother's needs demonstrated the confidence and compassion she had learned from watching her mother's example. The children's happiness and security stood as living proof that families formed by choice could be just as strong and loving as those created by blood, validating every sacrifice and struggle that had brought them to this point. The new equilibrium of their lives was marked by quiet moments of contentment that had once seemed impossible. Arthur reading bedtime stories to both children, Helen working on her medical studies while he graded papers nearby, family dinners filled with laughter and planning for the future. The wheelchair had become simply another piece of furniture rather than a symbol of limitation, while the scars of their individual pasts had healed into sources of strength rather than shame. Their love had indeed conquered all limitations, not by eliminating challenges but by proving that together they could face anything life might bring. 1 year after their arrival at the academy, Helen and Arthur received word that their story had inspired the establishment of a rehabilitation program for disabled veterans, with Helen invited to help design its protocols and Arthur asked to serve as its director. The recognition of their expertise and the opportunity to help others facing similar challenges provided perfect closure to their personal healing journey, while opening new chapters of service and purpose. Standing together on the porch of their new home, watching Annie play with baby Thomas in the yard, they marveled at how far they had traveled from that desperate day, when a broken soldier and a desperate widow had chosen to trust each other with their futures. The letter from Tim announcing his engagement to Mrs. Williamson brought the final piece of happiness to complete their transformed family circle. The wedding would take place at the academy, with Arthur performing his first official ceremony as a civilian chaplain and Helen serving as matron of honor, surrounded by all the people whose lives had been touched by their example of healing love. The celebration would mark not just two new marriages but the creation of a chosen family bound by affection, respect, and shared commitment to supporting each other through all of life's challenges. As Helen tucked Annie into bed and Arthur settled baby Thomas in his cradle, they reflected on the journey that had brought them from desperation to joy, from isolation to community, from brokenness to wholeness. Their marriage had begun as a practical arrangement between strangers, but had grown into a partnership that exemplified the very best of human love and resilience. Looking toward the future with confidence and hope, they knew that whatever challenges might come, they would face them together, proof that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin not with passion but with two broken people choosing to heal each other, one day at a time.